Hi, my name is Dwayne Gathers, and welcome to CivitasLA, featuring diverse and emerging leaders who make up this dynamic region and are creating community every day and building a better tomorrow. These bi-weekly conversations enable us to hear from, learn from, and be inspired by a new generation of civic entrepreneurs who are forging a path forward in making our region a stronger, more resilient, and connected group of citizens. Our goal is to elevate civic discourse, foster community connections, and promote civic knowledge and engagement across the greater Los Angeles region while elevating diverse and emerging voices in that conversation. You know, I recall back in the day, we used to write an essay, how we spent our summer vacation. Well, a twist on that could be how I spent my pandemic. So I'm really delighted about today's conversation because I had this opportunity to meet our guest professionally some years ago. And when we were able to get together last year, at some point, I inquired how he was doing and how he was navigating the pandemic. And he shared with me the most fascinating story, so I immediately knew that we had to have him on our podcast. A real estate professional developing multifamily projects across our region, Alex Valente decided to live in various communities and project types across our region, experiencing firsthand what his organization and others were developing for the rest of us. So what did he learn about various neighborhoods? What's his take on LA's diverse and varied communities, and how might these lessons inform the work that he does and how they think about development going forward? CivitasLA is delighted to be joined in studio this afternoon by Alex Valente, Senior Vice President, Trammell Crow Company. Alex, welcome to CivitasLA.
Thanks for having me, Dwayne.
Wonderful to have you in studio. Alex, on CivitasLA, we always appreciate when our guests can offer a brief introduction. So share with us an introduction to Alex Valente.
Sure. Thanks, Dwayne. I'm originally from New York City. I make sure I wear that on my sleeve. I kept my 917 phone number, just so people thought I was the real deal. I've been in LA, 17 plus years now. Grew up in New York, went to Horace Mann High School up in Riverdale, the Bronx, Trinity College up in Hartford, Connecticut. And then, I don't know what else I can tell you. I'm a big tennis player. Okay. That's been a theme in my life going back since I was 3 years old. I did a stint in investment banking out of Trinity, which probably changed the course of my life just because I just hated it so much. And then I actually ended up kind of traveling the world for a bit and then getting into the entertainment industry. Okay. So I did that for about a decade. On the producing and the acting side, I produced what I think is a pretty cool movie called Planet B-Boy. Okay. A crowd-pleasing documentary on breakdancing. That's partly kind of what brought me out to LA 17 plus years ago. And I've been working in the real estate field for 13 plus years. One of my tennis clients, affordable housing developer, Thomas Safran, kind of gave me my first chance gig in real estate. And I started that kind of late 09, 010, right at the same time I decided to go back to business school. So I'm a proud Bruin, went to UCLA Anderson. And I've been working in development for the past 13 years. I'm in my 10th year now with the Trammell Crow Company.
Gotcha. Well, you mentioned Thomas Safran and his organization, Thomas Safran and Associates, and we are thrilled that they have become recent sponsors and supporters of CivitasLA. So we appreciate them a great deal. Did not know that. So, Alex, as a New Yorker, Rangers, Knicks, Giants, Jets. What's your teams, and are you still loyal to any of them?
I am as loyal as you could possibly be. Yankees, Jets, Knicks, Rangers.
Okay, gotcha. Unbelievable. So, Alex, tell us about, so for our audience, tell us about Trammell Crow. Who are they? And tell us about the work that you do there.
Sure. Thanks, Dwayne. Trammell Crow Company is maybe the oldest and one of the most prestigious development firms in the U.S. and now we're international. But been in business for 75 plus years. 18 offices across the U.S. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of CBRE. Okay. We are working on about $28 billion of development right now across the U.S., all product types, but with a big focus on industrial and office, which was kind of the bread and butter of Trammell Crow going back 75 years. And we've made a big push into multifamily. We do it under the High Street Residential brand name, and we've been doing multi for about 20 years now.
Yeah. And your work is primarily in the multifamily side of things, correct?
That's correct. So at this point now, I'm part of our housing team here, really focused on LA County.
Gotcha. Well, Alex, last year when we had a sort of break between variants and the pandemic, we got together and you shared this most amazing journey with me when I asked you how you were doing during the pandemic. And you mentioned how, you decided that you were going to decamp from what you were doing and go on this journey of living in different communities and different product types. So for our audience, bring them into this conversation and share with us, how this journey began.
Sure. It's kind of a, I don't know, I guess relatively interesting story. I guess I'm here.
Absolutely. I found it interesting.
Been at Crow now for 10-ish years. Kind of started out doing all product types, working on everything, and for a variety of reasons, and mostly involved, you get involved in a lot of projects, and they're all in different various stages, and some come to fruition and some don't. Just happened to be that all the housing projects I happened to work on just kind of kept taking the next step. So after a few twists and turns, I kind of ended up being just kind of focused on housing here in LA County, and I just felt like I was a total imposter.
Okay.
And I just felt like I just didn't know housing as well as I should. I'd sit in all these kind of design, these architect meetings, and we'd be going through all these housing projects and these, distances and metrics and features. And, I kind of grew up in New York City. I grew up in an apartment building. Right. I lived in a couple kind of old condo buildings in LA, but I had never lived in the type of new development housing that we were developing, and right. I really just did not sort of feel, I didn't love just the authenticity of my own voice in these meetings.
Gotcha.
So I just kind of hatched this idea in my head. I had a condo at the time, and I was like, well, what if I just rent this condo out? I wasn't married, wasn't seeing anyone seriously. I was like, why don't I just rent this condo out and let me go live in some of these buildings and journal it and really just start to pay attention to how folks are actually experiencing these buildings that we're building. And then the other kind of feature or characteristic that I liked was I'd been kind of living in the same neighborhood of LA for 12, 13 years. And I was like, there's just so much more to LA. Let me try to do this across different parts of LA and really just try to get to know LA better, kind of just rediscover LA in a way. I don't know if I was feeling bored at the time, right, but it just seemed like one of these kind of ideas that came in my head, and then I couldn't unthink it. So I just kind of had to do it. Yeah. And I ended up going on this 18-month journey where I rented out my condo. Luckily, I found a good tenant. Yeah. I feel actually very thankful for that.
Yeah. And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Mid-City, kind of right on the border of, actually in the city of LA, but right on the border of West Hollywood and Beverly Hills.
Gotcha.
On Burton Way.
Got. Oh, yeah.
And I had been in that neighborhood again for 12, 13 years. So I was definitely up for a little adventure.
Sure.
And actually the first place I moved into was a UDR project on the west side in Marina del Rey, called the Jefferson. Yep. That was 298 units. It was built in 2008. They had a big renovation 2016. It was a wrap building.
Okay.
Meaning,
and for our non-real estate professionals, tell us about a UDR.
So another kind of thing that I kind of just latched onto in this sort of kind of harebrained idea I had was, I want to go live in some new buildings and see what they feel like and experience them, whether it's a low rise or a mid rise or a high rise. And I wanted to live in different parts of LA. So I ended up living in these 6 different parts of LA, which I'll get into in a second. And then I was like, well, I want to go live in all of our competitors' buildings.
Right.
Let me figure out what the heck they are building, if I like them, what I don't like. And then I actually lived in one of our buildings too, which I'll tell you about.
We're going to hear about that as well.
So UDR, they're a very well-known multifamily REIT that just focuses on housing across the country, and they have a number of projects in LA. And so I moved into their project, the Jefferson, in Marina del Rey.
Gotcha.
And one of the sort of nice phenomenons that kind of made this, journey possible is that a lot of projects now have short-term stays available in their buildings. So, it used to be you could only kind of get like a year lease or more in a building, or you'd really kind of pay up the wazoo for a short-term lease. But a lot of buildings have partnered up with these kind of, it's almost like corporate housing, but it's a short-term rental business. It's not Airbnb. So it's 30 days plus.
Right.
So on a few of these buildings, they had some of these short-term rentals. There's places, Blue Ground, Synergy, Pelican. They kind of all do it across LA. So I ended up living in 6 different communities, whether it was through one of these housing, short-term furnished housing, because I didn't want to move, 6 times and move furniture 6 times. And then a few of the projects I ended up living in, it kind of took on a life of its own. I started talking about it. And then some of my friends who were also in development or they work for these big companies, like, well, why don't you come live in our building? So I would go do that and figure out a solution to go live in a building of theirs for 2 or so months.
Right. So that's fascinating. I believe there are about 6 neighborhoods over 18 months. So walk us through this journey and let's hear about these neighborhoods and project types that you lived in.
Sure. So the first one, again, was this UDR project, the Jefferson, 2008 build. I never lived really that far west, so I was really excited to discover Marina del Rey. Yeah. It was just one of those neighborhoods everyone knows about, but I just didn't really feel like I authentically knew it.
Yeah.
So
it's just out there.
It's out there. It's west side. Take the 90 all the way. And I also liked this project, one, because it was UDR. I felt like I just didn't know that much about the UDR product. And it was a wrap construction. So that's essentially where the parking structure, is structured parking, is isolated and usually goes up 4 or 5 levels. Okay. And then the apartment units essentially kind of wrap around the parking structure.
Oh, really?
And it ends up, in terms of housing typologies and development costs, it's generally slightly cheaper and slightly faster to build than some podium projects where all of the kind of the apartments sit on top of the parking structure.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I really wanted to kind of see what it felt like to live in a wrap. Wraps are generally characteristic of or typical of more kind of suburban urban neighborhoods. So usually what you have in CBDs and downtowns, you have high rises. Right. In LA you have podium projects that are much more dense. And then as you get out to the suburbs, you have your single family homes, and then you have your garden style, 3 and 4 story kind of walk up or woody walk up, sometimes they're called, and wrap kind of sits right in the middle of all those. Gotcha. Kind of a suburban urban product. So I lived in and again, it's so funny just to describe it the way I did. I probably couldn't have done that, a couple of years ago.
Right. That's
it's just
great.
Kind of all part of the process here, and one of the reasons I wanted to do it. So I lived in this UDR project for 2 months, and it was great. Really kind of just discovered the West Side. I ended up kind of journaling and just discovering a lot of history of Marina del Rey. Figuring out kind of who else was developing there, what was cool to do there, and I would just make it a point to go and experience all of the things that you had in the neighborhoods, the nightlife, the bars, the restaurants, the water, the running paths, and it was really cool.
Okay. And then where next?
So from there, I went all the way east side. And we had just finished developing a project called Plaza Village in El Pueblo, which sits kind of on the northern edge of downtown, right near Union Station. Right. So I moved into one of our projects.
Oh, okay, great. Downtown, okay.
Downtown. So La Plaza Village, we finished that in 2019, 355 units. Wow. It's a podium project, so it kind of sits above the parking across 2 blocks in downtown Los Angeles. 43,000 square feet of retail, so a very true mixed use, mixed income community right there, kind of on the edge of Chinatown.
Okay. And then where next?
From there, I actually ended up staying in downtown.
Okay.
But I went to Bunker Hill,
Yeah.
which a lot of folks know, further to the west than El Pueblo. And I moved into a related project.
Right.
They have a high-rise there, 271 units called the Emerson, a really nice project up there on Grand Avenue, sits next to Walt Disney Hall.
I remember that opened up. It was quite the spot there. It was very, very high end, but Bunker Hill's on the quiet side. So give me your sense of that community.
I actually really liked living there. It was definitely more on the quiet side for downtown, but it kind of worked for downtown. It kind of worked for it. So it was a slightly older kind of demographic of folks that live there, and you could feel that walking around the project and just kind of getting into the elevators and going down to the lobby. But I liked living up there. I felt safe. I liked the views, and I liked the connectivity to the other parts of downtown. I mean, downtown's even though it's had its issues during the pandemic, it's a pretty cool place to live. And I really enjoyed living at the Emerson. I was taking all sorts of notes, related to our competitor. So I was taking every note I could, kind of trying to borrow the good, forget about the bad.
Okay. So that was stop number 3. Next stop?
That was stop number 3. Next stop was KTown.
Okay.
So, again, kind of through call it the LA real estate network, there's a building there called Next on 6th. That's 398 units. It's a giant building. And it's right on top of a Target.
Oh, okay.
So that was really interesting to live in a project that has one of these massive sort of retailers on the ground floor. Because, it's pretty common. A lot of cities want mixed use in their projects, and a lot of cities like Target or City Target, or they want one of those, for as an amenity for their constituents. So I lived above a Target, which
and is the metro stop there as well?
It's not there. No.
Okay.
It's not that far away.
Okay.
I ended up living in a project later on in Hollywood off the Red Line, but and that project was developed by a firm named Cypress Equity. And they ended up selling it to EQR Equity Residential. And funny enough, I have very good friends, one at Cypress and one also at EQR, who I, weirdly enough, actually introduced to each other. And they ended up purchasing this large property from each other. And they kind of set the housing up for me on that project. So I lived there for 2 months.
Okay.
I did not love living above a Target. I'll be honest.
Okay.
It sounds great. I'd probably rather be a block or 2 away from a Target, so I could walk to the Target. But it gets just a lot of transients, coming and going, and it ended up kind of attracting I don't know, maybe a different type of clientele that you tougher to mix with folks living in these what are mostly higher end buildings. So it wasn't something I didn't love living there. And what was really interesting about living there was kind of what happened when I lived there, which was it was the outset of the pandemic.
Okay.
So
we get March 2020.
It was March of 2020, and what was kind of wild just was all of a sudden, everything took a major kind of pause, clearly. And then, for basically the second half of my housing journey, it really obviously colored and changed the entire journey I was on, because all of a sudden now I'm living in KTown, which is, really, in my opinion, kind of known for its nightlife. I was really looking forward to having a lot of fun and going out in KTown.
Certainly one of our densest communities with a lot going on. It's very Manhattan-ish. Very
Manhattan-ish, and I thought it was a pretty tough place to live during the pandemic, when everyone you're kind of essentially quarantined to your unit, and I don't think there's not that much open space, I think, in KTown relative. I think most people would agree with that, relative to other neighborhoods. And it ended up being really interesting, just the effect that this kind of journey kind of had on me and my opinion of neighborhoods, and then my opinion of neighborhoods that potentially we would want to develop. I think it's nice having that kind of combination of green space combined with that kind of urban walkability of a place like KTown. But did not love living in KTown at the early onset of the pandemic.
And going from downtown Bunker Hill, where you talk about the demographic change from the west side, what's the demographic change that you experienced from downtown Bunker Hill to KTown? These are some massive buildings, 300 plus units. Yeah,
massive buildings. Just probably a younger demographic, probably a more Asian demographic in KTown, which is probably not that surprising. Those are probably the most noticeable between call it Bunker Hill and the Emerson, and then moving into Nexon 6.
And then where'd you go from KTown?
So I should add a note here.
Add a note.
Because it influenced kind of where I ended up going, but it was about this time that I actually right after I started this journey, I ended up meeting a girl who I ended up dating and then getting engaged to. So actually my wedding's in 2 weeks, which is kind of funny just to talk about this story now. But I met an Irish girl who was living in Mexico. Actually met her in Mexico. And then we started dating. And first of all, telling her about this thing I was doing, I think she must be kind of crazy I don't know what she thought, just to think what I kept telling her I was moving every 2 months. She's like, what's wrong with you?
She thought you were adventuresome.
I hope so. But I moved into KTown in March of 20, and I had been visiting her in Mexico City where she was living in March of 20, and she ended up coming to kind of quote unquote ride out this pandemic or ride out this outbreak thing for 2 weeks with me.
Right.
And she hasn't left. It's 2 years later. So we moved together into this apartment in KTown while the kind of world was falling apart. And after being in a small apartment in KTown, again, very urban, great under normal circumstances. I'm a urban guy. I love New York City. I love density, frankly. I feel more at home. I feel weird if it's too quiet.
I agree. I'm with you.
We decided to go, and now she was kind of going to join me on this journey. She didn't really have a choice.
Right.
And
well,
we
of course
thought,
she had a choice.
yeah. But we were like, where do we want to go next?
Okay.
And so we picked Santa Monica.
Okay.
And really it was because, hey, everything's shut down. You can't use any of the amenities in these buildings. By the way, when you lease a unit in a building, you're really not, and I checked this out in all these leases, you're not kind of quote unquote guaranteed the use of the amenity space. You are renting the unit. You're not renting the building. So it just brings up interesting things to think about when you're a landlord. And then they're really specific about this stuff. So just in case the amenities are shut down, you still have to pay rent because you get access to your unit. So, but all these amenity areas, all these common areas, all these gyms shut down in every building, right, across LA and most of the country. So, what's one amenity that you really can't maybe close? And there were certainly attempts, is the beach. So we wanted to be as close to the west side. We figured, look, if we're going to have this crazy pandemic thing, hopefully it wasn't going to last too much longer, which it did. Right. We thought we'd love to be, close to the water, close to the outside. Yeah. So we ended up moving into a building called Riva, a developer named NMS. Neil Schechter, relatively well-known developer here in Southern California. We lived there for 2 months. Riva was another podium building, 162 units. And we ended up living there when, all these kind of the National Guard got called out. We had our issue with some looting on some stores, and that happened kind of right below us, which was kind of wild. The sort of the night in Santa Monica when there was a kind of a big, call it, riot in downtown Santa Monica, was actually the night I got engaged, so I'll never forget it. And so then we were living together in Santa Monica for 2 months. And then from there, we ended up moving to really kind of the last building on this journey, which is we moved to Hollywood. Okay, so you've gone from the west side to downtown to KTown, back to the west side, and now we're in Hollywood. So let's talk about Hollywood. And then we moved into a Kilroy project, a beautiful building called Columbia Square. And we moved in there, a nice high-rise building, beautiful rooftop, beautiful pool, which was shut down for most of the time we lived there. Right. But I think, one of the things that we prioritized kind of across this journey was in Santa Monica. We ended up, I sort of feel a little bit, kind of weird or awkward saying it, but we didn't feel that safe walking around the neighborhood and the building itself, just felt, at the time it was kind of a wild time, right?
Sure,
the
right.
stores kind of right there on Santa Monica were like all broken into. We didn't love it, and I think we actually decided we kind of liked the safety of a high rise and a doorman building, and we just felt better about that. So we moved into Columbia Square. Kilroy building was being managed by Graystar. A lot of these landlords, if they don't self-manage, they hire third-party property management firms. So I was taking notes and observations the whole time on how the different property managers and buildings operated. So
right. And give me your take on Hollywood during that time. There's been so much going on in Hollywood, positive, and then obviously most recently some negative. Give me your take on Hollywood, because I know you guys are developing a project on Hollywood Boulevard near Gower.
So that was thanks. That was another reason we chose the high rise, a 21-story high rise that's about a block and a half from a 21-story high rise that we actually entitled in Hollywood, Mitch O'Farrell's district. And just to have the experience of living a block from where we're going to develop a project, I thought would be pretty priceless. And it all kind of worked out. We were kind of craving, call it a doorman building, just for the safety factor. Rebecca actually at the time didn't drive. She's Irish. She'd be driving on the left side of the road. That probably wouldn't be good.
Right.
Didn't have a license at the time. She does now.
Well, I think there probably are some people who drive on the wrong side of the 101 at various hours of the morning.
You never know. Always gotta keep your guard up. I think Hollywood had a really tough kind of time, I think, during the pandemic. And I love Hollywood. I've lived in that neighborhood for quite some time, but I think we all were kind of challenged with these homeless issues, which unfortunately are kind of hitting all across the country, especially in these kind of super urban areas. And I think Hollywood was no stranger to that. So we really experienced Hollywood and these buildings at a time when everything was kind of being questioned. So it's funny. I mean, I talk about this journey a lot, but where you live generally, it's like such an emotional decision, right? It's not work, it's not professional. You're kind of coming home, and I think it's an emotional decision, emotional choice to begin with, and then you just layer on top of this the sort of insanity of the last 2 years and quarantines, and we ended up getting COVID while we were living in Hollywood, and had to confine ourselves to this apartment for 2 weeks. You are so conscious and conscientious of your space, especially when you can't leave. So it was just what's the good word? I think maybe we'll get here in this interview, but I think a real silver lining to this pandemic and this quarantine. I think people, again, they are so emotional about where they live in the first place, but just getting to be that much more conscious about where you live and the space that you're in. I think that the silver lining in all of this is that I think there's going to be better and better kind of product, better and better, and maybe newer locations kind of mapped out for housing across cities as people really kind of realize. I think we kind of want it all, especially if you're living in a rental place. You want that walkability. You want that hint of urbanism. You want to be able to walk down the street and get a coffee, and go, to a sports bar. I'm a huge sports fan, and watch something. But you also want some green. You want some ocean. You want some walkability. You want some open space. And I think in the future, hopefully in LA County, there's going to be some cities that maybe folks didn't think of, just kind of how I maybe rediscovered LA, parts of LA that I had never lived in before and experienced. I think especially with the evolution of transit here in LA, I point to the Expo line, the Gold Line, all across kind of the foothills down there, the San Gabriel Mountains. I think these centers are going to really become attractive and more attractive places to live for renters, and not just single family homeowners, because they can offer elements of access to transportation, access to urban features, walkable downtowns, and then just the ability to have some open space.
So before I ask you about these perceptions of LA and the various communities, of these 6, which was your favorite and why?
My favorite building was the Kilroy project, was Columbia Square.
Okay.
I thought it was a really beautiful building, and I just thought the whole thing was so well done. And we just loved living there. Hollywood at the time was kind of having some challenges, but like living in the building, we felt great. We loved our unit, and that it really kind of colors your whole time there.
Sure.
Just how much you like waking up where you live, living where you wake up. And in terms of communities, I like downtown.
Okay.
And I like that northern edge of downtown.
Okay. Interesting.
There is the most amazing new park called the Los Angeles State Historic Park.
Sure.
In downtown, we ended up doing another project that completed after this journey by the park.
Yeah.
And it's just such an unreal kind of that juxtaposition between being in the city, in downtown LA, but having this 32-acre park nearby was amazing. And I just love the food scene in downtown. I love being in and around Chinatown, El Pueblo, Alvera Street, Union Station. There's so many restaurants, so many different types of food, so much to do. I really kind of liked that experience, living and having all these things to do.
Sure, that's great. So, Alex, so based on all of that, how does this experience inform the work that you and your colleagues do, and how did your colleagues respond to you, at the conclusion of this journey?
It informed everything, right? I mean, just I like to think that I feel like way more informed, and I can bring a real perspective and point of view to the projects that we're building as we design them, thinking through things. I mean, one thing I did not like living in the Jefferson and my parking spot in this kind of wrap construction. I mean, it would take me 15 minutes to walk from my parking spot to my unit.
Okay,
I mean, a nightmare when you've got groceries. I mean, like really, like your arms are falling off. You have to make 2 or 3 trips. Like those types of things, really matter, and they really affects if every time you go grocery shopping, you like dread having to walk from your car to your unit. Like
gotcha.
It really you can't compartmentalize that for too long, because like every once, twice, 3 times a week you just get a reminder. Oh God, I can't believe I'm doing this again.
Yep.
So it was just really fantastic from that perspective. Like even things like how long you got to wait for an elevator. What else? One thing I discovered, I like carpet.
Okay, interesting.
I never thought I'd like carpet. I liked having carpet in my bedroom. I liked kind of taking my feet off the bed and putting on a carpet. And I had kind of always viewed carpet as sort of a dated, feature of apartment buildings. But the Kilroy project in Hollywood, beautiful new building, hardwood floors in most units, had carpet in the bedroom.
Interesting.
And it was, a very cool, sleek carpet. It wasn't like the 1980s
I'm
carpet.
Sure.
But it felt...
given the rents over there, I'm sure it was a really nice carpet.
Exactly. and it felt, I was like, it definitely opened my eyes. Like, one, it helps with, noise up and down floors, which is a real thing. It's actually, there have been kind of studies done. It's like the number one factor in what decides, whether someone's like happy or not in a building and maybe renews for the next year is literally noise in the building.
Oh, absolutely.
So thinking through the different assemblies that go into like what is the kind of divides floor to floor, and thinking through that stuff. I take a really kind of close eye on how we do that in buildings based on what I've seen in other buildings. It's kind of a fun perspective to have.
Well, it's interesting because people like apartment living, and I love apartment living, but we want that suburban space, and we don't want to hear or see our neighbors necessarily. So with that, do you think that we are building what the people of LA need, and as the demographics of LA changes, do you think you guys are in tune with what the needs are going forward?
I'd like to think we're in tune. I think we just need more housing. And that's not, again, I don't know, super kind of groundbreaking comment to make, but I think we need more housing. We need supply at this point. We need, market rate housing. We need affordable housing. We can't even come close to housing the number of people that want to live here. So, and because of that, you've kind of seen these rents kind of skyrocket. And it's, you're pretty classic, example of supply versus demand. So, I think then once we're all kind of coming out of this pandemic, the next step is, okay, we need supply, number one, but two, then, what are we building? And I think just kind of, catering to people and catering to preferences and being flexible with the types of space that we have. I mean, we're putting co-working space into our last development, which delivered during the pandemic, and to our next project that we're doing down in San Pedro, which kind of sits at the southern tip of LA. We're putting a really nice, sort of exciting co-working space there, because I think there will be a new normal here for a few years.
Interesting you say that, because I recently met a company called UB, and they are a co-working space that you can rent space by the hour, and they are actually viewed as an amenity in the buildings. So for people who are creatives, don't want their own co-working space or executive office suite, can go downstairs and rent space by the hour. And it's all turnkey, and they're now in 2 buildings, one in Hollywood and one over in Mid-City over in West Adams.
Oh, cool.
So, very fascinating.
Don't know them. We've been developing these last 2 buildings with co-working. If you're a resident, it's a call it a quote unquote free amenity. If you're paying rent. But we have one right now in our Lewellyn project. That's the one by the state park in Chinatown, and it gets tons of use. I think, even if you work from home, you still like to get out of your apartment.
Absolutely.
So you still like to go for a walk and kind of connect with neighbors and just connect with, really just, it feels, you get a little peace of mind just walking out of your apartment.
Absolutely.
Especially if you've got confined to your apartment for 2 weeks.
So let's go back to downtown, however. I would throw this in here. I just remember in my work with the LAEDC, working in collaboration with the downtown bid, one of the things that was so important to the downtown bid about building community in downtown was also actually having larger homes and larger apartment product types. So because what they were finding is that when you get beyond the downtown renter, after he or she becomes a certain age, they get married, they move away because there are no schools downtown, and everything's like studios or 1-bedrooms. What do you think of larger apartment types that could accommodate families so they could, particularly in places like downtown?
I think it's inevitable. I think we, not to keep talking about one of our own projects, but we delivered this. We delivered this 318-unit Lewellyn project, and we had designed it, way before the pandemic kind of happened, and we actually designed it 60% 2 bedrooms, and probably about a 15-20% kind of bigger unit on average than most anything that was delivered in downtown. And it really was a bet kind of against the grain, because everyone was kind of going smaller and smaller, really to get their kind of per square foot unit pricing up, because everyone's kind of facing this construction cost escalation world. So everyone was trying to build these smaller units, get higher rents. But, I think we basically made a bet that, hey, let's build something a little bit against the grain. Let's build more 2 bedrooms. Let's build bigger units, and see what happens. And I think we ended up being rewarded because we delivered into the pandemic. And at Lewellyn, 10% of our units right now, and that's about 30 to 35 units, are families in these 2-bedroom units, and I love it. I mean, so when you go walk around the project, I mean, it really kind of changes the energy of a project when you've got like young kids running around. And we tried to, we figured, we made a bet that we're going to attract some families with the 2 bedrooms and the bigger units. So we built in some multi-purpose areas, ended up becoming like a play area. And, there was maybe a little bit of fear, like, the singles might not want to mix with the families and the kids, but we haven't found that to be the case.
Well, that came up in conversation many episodes ago when we had B. Stotzer from New Economics for Women on, and we talked about the work that they do, particularly aimed at Latino-led families. And the idea was to build bigger units because, you want to accommodate larger family sizes. And so much of the development that we have these days, it seems like, is aimed at sort of the YouTube celebrities who are, in 500 square feet of space. So.
And I think, again, if there's anything that, is kind of due for a change, or maybe the pendulum to swing the other direction, I mean, it's, again, just this idea of, like, you could be forced to, I mean, who knows? There's another variant. You could be forced to, spend all this time in your apartment. There's a new normal now with work from home. Kind of, I think all the pundits data is pointing to, maybe it's 3 to 4 days a week you're going to the office, so that means you're home 3 to 4 days during the workday. And who wants to sit around in a 450 square foot apartment for that much time?
Right.
So I think again, silver lining, but I think you're going to see a lot of changes in the ways that folks like us are designing and developing buildings that kind of go and try to meet this demand for folks that are looking for the best of both worlds.
Well, Alex, you've lived in a number of what appears to be larger apartment buildings, and I know, LA has been sort of modeled around single-family homes, and everyone's complaining about, shade and parking and all these other things. But, when we talk about housing development, we fall into thinking about overly simplistic categories of NIMBYs and YIMBYs. So, how are you going about engaging and including community in Trammell Crow's projects, and what's been the reception from community as you've built these larger projects in these neighborhoods?
At Trammell Crow Company, maybe just to pat ourselves on the back, it's a great culture there. There's a reason you're in business for 75 years. You kind of do things the right way. So, from day one, we preach it, we wear it on a sleeve, we walk the walk. It's all about, community engagement, community mindedness, outreach. So, it's really tough to go into a community and just build a building and then not be connected to it. I don't even really know how you would do it, but, as a company, every time we go to develop a project, outreach is probably the number one thing we focus on initially. You connect with planning, you connect with neighbors, you connect with, the folks that lead the city. You do it early, you do it often, you do it consistently, and you stay in touch with these folks and you listen. Because, you're talking to some folks that have been living maybe in a neighborhood for 5, 10, 15, 50 years.
Sure.
So you usually end up getting a better project if you just kind of listen to like what they want. And of course you can't please everybody, but it's just something that, we're doing a project right now in North Hollywood, District NoHo, 15-acre project, 2.2 million square feet.
15 acres.
15 acres, 2.2 million square feet, 1,500 units, affordable component, a market rate component, about 100,000 square feet of retail, and we're building a transit center for Metro. It's right where the red line kind of ends and meets the orange line, which goes out to Northridge and to Chatsworth. We've been working on the project now for a couple of years. We just issued our draft EIR, but we've done over 100 community meetings at this point. And it's just something, again, that's a serious project of scale, and you would expect someone to do that, but we definitely just get out there and we meet people ourselves. It's always us on the front lines, and I think we kind of do that as a company, and I just think it's kind of the right way to do business.
Sure.
And
that's great.
It feels good, and I really do think it does make the projects ultimately better.
Sure. Well, Alex, this has been great. Again, when I saw you last year, I just had to have this conversation on our podcast, and we really appreciate it. And certainly because you've been in 6 different product types in 6 different neighborhoods, you'll find the lightning round as we conclude to be a lot of fun. And we look forward to getting to know more about you through some of your LA favorites. And are you ready?
Hit me.
So you lived in all these communities. Give us a favorite restaurant or 2.
I love Terroni on Beverly Boulevard, close to Fairfax. Authentic Italian.
Gotcha. Give us a favorite place to take a sip, whether that's a coffee or a cocktail or tea or...
Anyone who knows me knows I love Kings Road Cafe, also on Beverly, east of the Beverly Center. Best coffee in L.A. I'm addicted to it.
Okay, excellent. Favorite place to take a visitor?
The Grove.
Okay.
I just love it. I just love it. Makes you happy.
Interesting. Good.
Gets more visitors than Disneyland.
Right.
It's just such a nice, beautiful place to walk around.
Okay. Well, we love our open space here in Los Angeles, so give us a favorite hike or park.
Favorite park, I guess I mentioned earlier, but Los Angeles State Historic Park, probably known as the Cornfields Park. I feel like a lot of people in LA actually don't know about it.
Yep.
It's an amazing park in downtown. And I've got some very kind of mid-city with my answers here, but I've always been a Runyon guy.
That's fine. We love Runyon Canyon. And give us a hidden gem. Give us a place that no one may know about.
I'll give you two.
Okay.
I really love Bakari on 3rd.
Ah, yeah.
Also mid-city, but it's such a charming place with this amazing garden in the back. You kind of walk through this entrance that you almost have to duck to get in, and then you kind of come out on the other side, and you're in this beautiful garden.
And of course, you've got to try the new Bakari over in Silver Lake as well.
Haven't been there, but heard of it.
That's a great one as well. Go ahead. Now, give us your second hidden gem.
Second hidden gem. There's a great bar called Apothec. It's actually out of New York. They opened up a location on the eastern edge of Chinatown, also by this park.
Okay.
It feels like you're at the end of the world.
Okay.
And it sits on the LA River, up against the corner of the park. And I actually took Rebecca there on our first date in LA.
Okay.
I
So
think
she knew you were a hipster then.
When she took it was like basically our third date, and she ended up taking an Uber to there, and she didn't know what was she's like, who is this guy? I better hope I know him well enough. And but once you kind of get past that, and she realized I'm not a serial killer, right. It ended up being like an awesome night, an incredible place to like have a drink. Really does feel like the end of the world, because you're just sitting there on the river, up against the edge of the park in this neighborhood, and like it's nowhere, like you'd have a hard time kind of figuring out where you were in LA.
Okay.
If someone just kind of plopped you down on the inside there.
That's great. So it looks like downtown's a big winner in this conversation. We appreciate that. Well, Alex, this has been a great dialogue, and we really appreciate hearing about this incredible journey. Tell me, given that you journaled this, are you going to write a book or write some articles for LA Magazine or something like that? What are you going to do with all this information?
No plans right now. It was just fun to write this stuff down. You forget so many things. I forget so many things on a daily basis. So writing it down just kind of made it all kind of more real for me. And I would send out my journals to like some of my colleagues. I send them out to my friends, and it's just kind of a fun thing to share. I'd say the best part about it, honestly, is like a conversation like this, and then I would send this stuff to friends and colleagues, and then they write back to you, and they kind of give you their thoughts, and all of a sudden you have like a real
community
and point of view on this stuff, and it's just been a real nice. I'm really happy I did it. I lastly, I guess I'll end on. I do think it's funny that after doing this crazy journey across LA and 18 months living in all of these different, apartment buildings, really being the true consummate renter, learning it from the inside, Rebecca and I bought a house.
Yeah.
About a year ago. So just the pendulum swings. Never thought I'd live in a house, and we love it. And maybe it's just this focus on space, or this consciousness about space, but all of a sudden it was like American dream. I want the backyard. I want that private open space at home. And it's just kind of just so interesting that it really went from like kind of, one side of the pendulum to the other, and I love living in a house now.
So I'm not going to ask you which community, because you may be one of those homeowners who show up at those planning meetings complaining about the 200-unit apartment building going up down the street blocking your son.
I support smart, community-focused development. I think there are a lot of folks like us that do it the right way. I don't think you last very long in this business if you don't do things the right way, which is just listening, right? And following through and doing what you say you're going to do. So I think the future is bright for LA. I think the future is bright for housing. If we can kind of maybe get out of our own way on some policy issues. But I think LA is a terrific place to live, and love being able to develop communities here. Yeah.
Well, as we say on CivitasLA, the guest gets the last word. Give us a final thought.
Final thought is the future is bright. There's a silver lining. We're all going to be focused on space, where we live, how we live, how we work. And I think, there's a lot of folks out there that are trying to figure out what folks want and what they want to do and how they want to live and how they want to work. And I think that's a great kind of tension. It's like, what is it? no pressure, no diamonds. So I think that is going to build up, and people are going to kind of go meet this demand that's out there. And I think we're going to see, kind of better and more connected places to live in LA, on transit, off transit, with characteristics of both that I think will, hopefully kind of make people happy, which I think we'd like to do. And I think people, you want to love where you live and you want to love where you work. It's kind of basic.
Yep. Well, Alex, thank you for joining us today and sharing this incredible journey across our city. We really appreciate it. And certainly on behalf of CivitasLA, congratulations to you and your new bride. Congratulations on that. May you have many, many wonderful years together in your home in the city of Los Angeles. And to our audience, thank you as always for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we hope you'll join us in 2 weeks as we look forward to yet another great civic conversation. Until we meet again, stay strong and get involved. To learn more about CivitasLA and share feedback on this program, or if you have a recommendation about future programs, please visit our website at www.civitasla.com. And connect with us on Facebook at CivitasLA, Instagram at Civitas_LA, and Twitter at Civitas_LA.